In 1893, a 28-year-old woman walked up the gangway of a ship bound for Europe. She was traveling alone, which respectable single women simply did not do. Her purse held $200. One dress was packed in her trunk, and inside her head sat the full technical specifications of a machine most men of the era did not believe a woman could even understand. Her name was Kate Gleason, and she was crossing an ocean to sell gears. What she pulled off on that trip would help put her family's name inside almost every car that would ever be built. Henry Ford would one day insist she invented the whole thing herself. She didn't, and the truth about who did is stranger than the myth. If you have ever ridden in a vehicle, you have trusted her work without knowing it. So tell us in the comments, what are you driving right now? That is where this story begins. To understand why a young woman was willing to cross an ocean alone, you have to go back to a single sentence. Her father said out loud when she was 11 years old, "The Gleason family did not begin with money." William Gleason was an Irish immigrant who had left Tipperary as a boy, learned the machine trade the hard way through a string of apprenticeships, and even spent time doing armory work before striking out on his own. In 1865, with the United States still bleeding and rebuilding from the Civil War, he opened a tiny shop in Rochester, New York. The place sat beside a rushing channel of water called Brown's Race, and it made ordinary tools, lathes, planers, the everyday iron of a growing country. William had big dreams and a small bank balance. What he wanted more than anything was a son who would stand beside him at the workbench and carry the family name into the future. He had that son. His name was Tom. And in 1876, typhoid fever took him. Grief settled over the household. But it was what William said in the middle of that grief that changed everything. His young daughter overheard him murmur, "Oh, if Kate had only been a boy." Most children would have been crushed by those words. Kate did something else with them. The very next Saturday, she walked down to her father's shop and asked him to put her to work. He smiled, handed her a stack of bills to sort, and unknowingly lit the fuse on one of the most remarkable careers in American industry. She was 11, and she had just decided to become the son her father thought he had lost. By the age of 14, Kate was keeping the books for the entire operation. She was a schoolgirl by day and the company's bookkeeper by night, learning the business from the inside while other children her age were still playing. Her mind was sharp enough that in 1884 she did something almost unheard of for a woman of her time. She enrolled at Cornell University as its first female engineering student. It should have been the start of a bright academic path. It lasted barely a year. Back in Rochester, the family firm hit a rough patch, and her father could not afford to keep the man he had hired to replace her. So a letter arrived calling Kate home. The story goes that a classmate found her sitting under a tree on campus, crying as she read it. She would try twice to return to Cornell and finish her degree, and both times the business pulled her back. She never graduated. Instead, she taught herself engineering on the shop floor night after night until she understood the machines as well as any man who had earned the diploma she never got. But numbers on a ledger and lessons on a factory floor were not what set her apart. What set her apart was a decision she made about the machine sitting in the corner of her father's shop. A strange device almost no one else believed in. In 1874, William had invented something called the bevel gear planer. To picture why it mattered, you need to understand a small problem that was quietly holding back the entire industrial world. A bevel gear is a cone-shaped gear, and its job is to take spinning power and turn it around a corner, to send force from a shaft pointing one way toward a wheel pointing another. Nearly every machine that needed to bend power around an angle depended on these gears. And before William's invention, each one had to be shaped by hand, slowly, unevenly, and expensively. His planer changed that. It could cut bevel gears with a consistency no human hand could match. It was, in the truest sense, a machine that made the machines of the future possible. And here is the part almost everyone missed at the time. The real fortune was never going to come from selling gears. It was going to come from selling the machine that cut them. Kate saw it before her brothers did. She pushed her father to concentrate the company's whole future on that one product line, arguing that a machine which made gears faster and cheaper than any rival would beat anything else they could build. It was a bold bet on a single idea. Then fate handed the family a strange piece of luck. In 1889, a fast-moving fire tore through the neighboring Genesee Foundry building. For most businesses, a blaze next door is a disaster. For Gleason, it became an opening, a chance to expand into the space and reshape the company around gear production. Out of the ashes, the reorganized Gleason Tool Company took form, and the family bet Kate had been pushing for was now locked in. And then the American economy did something that would have ended most companies right there. In 1893, the country fell into a brutal financial panic. Banks failed, factories closed, and orders across the machine trade simply vanished. The order books at Gleason sat empty, and a lesser firm would have quietly waited to die. Kate refused to wait. Her doctor, worried about her health, had actually suggested she take a restful vacation to Atlantic City. Instead, she looked at the blank pages in the company ledger and made a wildly different choice. If American factories had no money to buy, she would go find factories that did. Across the Atlantic, in a Europe that was not suffering the same collapse. So she boarded a ship with $200, a single dress, and a letter of introduction from Henry Sharp of the respected firm Brown and Sharp. She was 28, alone, and betting the family name on the idea that European industry would take her seriously. That letter opened so many doors that she later tried to send Sharp half of everything she earned on the trip as thanks, but he gently sent the money back. She didn't know it yet, but that single letter of introduction was about to permanently change the global hierarchy of American manufacturing. Picture what she was walking into. She arrived in England, Scotland, France, and Germany as a young, unaccompanied American woman, asking to speak with the hard-nosed men who ran the continent's largest factories, and asking them to trust her judgment on precision engineering. Travel was slow and lonely, the language often foreign, and every meeting began with the same wall of doubt. She carried a private motto through all of it, 3 Latin words she lived by, possum volo, meaning I can if I will. In her own words, she was treated as a curiosity. In those early days, I was a freak, she later admitted. I talked of gears when a woman was not supposed to know what a gear was. But the curiosity opened doors that a familiar face never could. Men agreed to meet the strange American visitor out of pure novelty, and then something unexpected happened out once she started talking. She knew the machine cold. She could discuss tooth angles, cutting speeds, and load stress with an ease that stunned them. She answered every hard question thrown at her, and the doubt in the room slowly turned into respect. The novelty got her into the room. The expertise closed the sale. She came home with orders from some of the most prestigious firms in Europe, and with something worth far more than a single trip's revenue. She had planted the seeds of a global sales network at a time when almost no American manufacturer was even thinking about overseas markets. More than a century later, the majority of the company's sales would still come from outside the United States. That entire international empire traces back to one woman, one dress, and one refusal to sit still during a depression. And yet the ocean crossing was not even the strangest twist in her legend. The strangest twist involved the most famous industrialist in the world getting a basic fact completely wrong. And Kate refusing to let the lie stand, even though the lie made her look like a genius. As the automobile age arrived, the demand for bevel gears exploded. Every car being built needed a way to send power from its engine around a right angle to turn the rear wheels. That was precisely the problem Gleason machines solved better than anyone alive. The company that had nearly gone under in 1893 was suddenly sitting at the center of the fastest-growing industry on Earth, and its machines were shaping the gears inside the cars rolling out of a young Detroit. And Kate, as the firm's brilliant and tireless saleswoman, became the public face of it all. She became so identified with the technology that people simply assumed she had invented it. Henry Ford himself is said to have praised the Gleason planer as the finest machine work ever done by a woman. It was a stunning compliment. It was also completely false. And Kate knew it. Here's where her character shows most clearly. When a major newspaper described her as a feminine mechanical genius who had created the device, she could have stayed silent and let the myth grow. A legend like that would have made her famous beyond measure. Instead, she sat down and wrote a letter correcting the record, insisting the credit belonged to her father. She wanted to be known for what she had actually done, not for a fairy tale that happened to flatter her. In an age that gave women almost nothing, she gave away the one prize she could easily have kept. That honesty would eventually earn her something no amount of myth could. She became the first woman, admitted as a full member of the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, and one of the first women welcomed into a major German engineering society as well. At one industry event, she was reportedly the only woman in a hall of 4,000 men. The recognition was real, and it was hers, earned on the merits rather than borrowed from a headline. But the family she was fighting so hard to build up was quietly turning against her, and the people who pushed her out were the two she had spent her whole life beside. Her younger brothers, James and Andrew, had grown into gifted engineers in their own right. James, in particular, was a serious talent who would soon help design the company's next great leap. But as the three siblings were handed shared control of the business, the closeness curdled into a power struggle. Kate was loud, magnetic, famous, and impossible to overlook, and her brother Andrew, by several accounts, resented all of it. He finally forced the issue with an ultimatum. Either Kate left the company or he would. Their father put the decision in the siblings' hands. James sided with Andrew, and in 1913, after roughly 35 years of building the family name, Kate walked out the door of the business she had helped rescue. It was, she later said, heartbreaking to leave the father and the friends she loved. Most people cast out of their own family's company at 47 would have quietly faded. What Kate did next is almost hard to believe, and it proves the ocean voyage was no fluke. Within a year, a bankruptcy court did something no American court had really done before. It named a woman as the receiver of a collapsed machine company, the Ingle Machine Company in East Rochester. Translation: they handed a broken, debt-drowned business to Kate and asked her to either save it or bury it. She saved it. In under 2 years, she took a firm buried in roughly $140,000 of debt and turned it into an operation worth over $1 million. Then, when the president of a local national bank left to fight in the First World War, Kate stepped in and ran it, becoming the first woman in the country to lead a national bank without inheriting the seat. She was not finished. She looked at how ordinary families were housed and realized the construction trade was making the same mistake the gear industry once had, building everything slowly, by hand. So she brought factory precision to real estate. Using poured concrete, she mass-produced an entire subdivision of affordable homes near Rochester, complete with a country club and a park, years before the famous post-war suburbs took all the credit for the idea. She bought land in California, in South Carolina, and in France. When she died in 1933, she left an estate worth over $1.5 million. The woman who spent her life insisting she was no genius had quietly built a personal fortune that rivaled the company that pushed her out. Susan B. Anthony, who had known the family for years, once inscribed a book to her as the ideal businesswoman she had dreamed of 50 years before. Meanwhile, the company that let her go did exactly what she always believed it could. That same year she was forced out, her brother James and a colleague designed the spiral bevel gear, a smoother, stronger, quieter evolution of the family's original idea. A few years later came the hypoid gear, which let engineers lower a car's drive shaft and with it the entire body of the automobile, changing how cars looked and how they drove. The luxury carmaker Packard was among the first to put that breakthrough on the road, and the rest of the industry rushed to follow. Gleason machines had gone from useful to essential. When the Second World War came, the transmissions inside the American Sherman tank were cut on Gleason technology, quietly powering the armor that rolled across Europe. When the country reached for the moon, critical geared components in the Apollo program traced back to the same Rochester roots. Panama Canal locks, jet engines, helicopters, ocean liners, the fingerprints of that little shop beside Brown's Race are on almost every machine that bends power around a corner, on land, at sea, and in the air. And that is the quiet, staggering scale of what this family built. Today, Gleason stands as the largest gear technology provider in the world, with plants across the United States, Germany, Switzerland, India, China, and Japan. Nearly every car, truck, and aircraft you have ever ridden in carries gears shaped by their machines or their methods. It is one of the most complete industrial empires in American history, a company that outlived its rivals, its wars, and its own founding generation. And it is still running strong, more than 160 years after a grieving immigrant opened a one-room shop. But an empire this large usually remembers its architects. And for most of a century, the person who arguably did the most to build it was the one the world quietly chose to forget. Her name sits on an engineering college today, yet millions who drive her gears have never heard it. So here is the question worth sitting with. How many other empires were quietly built by someone history erased? Tell us the forgotten name you think deserves this story in the comments.